May I now request Rotarian Farad Jamal to kindly introduce our guest speaker, Ambassador Suri.
Good afternoon, President, and ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome, Ambassador Navdeep Suri. Firstly, I'm deeply grateful on behalf of the club that you found time to address the club, and we're looking forward to hearing you. Let me tell you briefly about Ambassador Suri. He's a distinguished fellow and director at the Center for New Economic Diplomacy at the Observer Research Foundation in Delhi. He has recently completed a distinguished 36-year career in foreign service, having served in India's diplomatic missions in Cairo, Damascus, Washington, Dar es Salaam, and London, and as India's Consul General in Johannesburg. All very exciting locations, I must say. He has also headed the West Africa and Public Diplomacy departments in the Ministry of External Affairs. He was India's High Commissioner to Australia, Ambassador to Egypt, and UAE. In a rare gesture, ladies and gentlemen, the President of UAE conferred on him the Order of Zayed II, the country's second highest civilian award. I'm not so sure many diplomats have ever earned this, but we are extremely proud of what you've done for Indian diplomats and for the nation. Absolutely incredible. Congratulations, even so belated. His innovative use of social media in public diplomacy in 2010 also received extensive recognition and 2 prestigious awards. Navdeep has learned Arabic and French, has a master's degree in economics, and has written on India's Africa policy, on public diplomacy, and on IT outsourcing industry. His English translations of his grandfather Nanak Singh's classic Punjabi novels have been published by Penguin as The Watchmaker and by HarperCollins as A Life Incomplete and Khuni Vaisakhi. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Ambassador Navdeep Suri. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Farhad, and it's such a pleasure to join this distinguished audience today. I don't know how many of you would really be interested in discussing India's foreign policy over your regular meeting, and that also about the Middle East. So I guess the challenge for me is to try and make it interesting and try and tell you why it matters. I chose this topic in consultation with Farhad because my last assignment was Abu Dhabi. And before that, of course, I was also ambassador to Egypt. So having learned some Arabic, it's a region that I'm conversant with and maybe passionate about. But it's also a very happening part of the world. And a lot has been happening there lately. I won't go into the entire laundry list, and there are some places like Libya and Syria that I'm going to consciously leave out of my conversation. Happy to come back to that if somebody's particularly interested. But in terms of the shifting sands that I spoke about, I guess there are 3 areas that I wanted to pick out in particular. And why do they matter to us? And why do they matter to Mumbai in particular? Why we should pay more attention to what's going on really in your backyard out of Mumbai. So the first of these 3 topics that I thought I'd mention is the Abraham Accords. Not just because I was in UAE, but really the idea of normal relations between UAE and Israel, followed thereafter by restoration of diplomatic ties between Bahrain and Israel and Morocco and Israel, is really quite a big deal. Now, because I've served in Egypt, I also saw the post-Camp David accords between Egypt and Israel. And I can tell you that, after some 40 years of Camp David, what you see is kind of a cold peace between Egypt and Israel. And there's really no traction for it on the Egyptian street. It's hard to find any Egyptian commentator who's willing to stand up and speak positively in terms of that relationship. But if you look at UAE and the restoration of normal ties in August last year, in the span of less than 6 months, direct flights are taking place, ambassadors are in place, technology and finance tie-ups are happening. There's virtually a delegation coming or going every week despite COVID protocols. a place like Burj Khalifa actually has a kosher restaurant now in Dubai. And Dubai also boasts of the first rabbi who can cater to the spiritual and religious needs of the Jewish community, which is expanding over there. So that just gives you, in a nutshell, the degree of change that is happening. Now, I'd be the first to recognize that the Abraham Accords do not address Palestinian aspirations. That whole issue still very much remains on the agenda to be addressed in some form or the other. But the fact that a country like UAE, which was a strong supporter of the Palestinian cause and is, the fact that it has normalized so rapidly, what does it mean? The second one, major development that took place again only a couple of months back, is that after having been at loggerheads for almost 2.5 years, Qatar and its neighbors have made up. This was the famous Al-Ula agreement in Saudi Arabia. And as a result of that, the kind of Arab quartet, which was UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, have decided to normalize ties between their countries. And I think, while the details haven't been spelled out, one of the principal concerns that the quartet had against Qatar was the manner in which Qatar was openly supporting Islamist movements, be it in Syria, be it in Libya, be it in the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt itself, or in particular the manner in which Qatar was using Al Jazeera. Not the English version of Al Jazeera, which many of us watch and are quite fond of, but the Arabic version of Al Jazeera, which has a lot of resonance on the Arab street, and the manner in which Al Jazeera was being used as a platform for some of the more radical groups. So hopefully we'll see some change in that. And the third major development, I think, which we need to keep our eyes on is with the advent of the Biden administration in Washington, the moves that seem to be underway to try and resuscitate the nuclear deal, or the JCPOA, as it's called by its acronym. There is a bit of a situation of who goes first. The Iranians expect the Americans to roll back the sanctions, and then they will return to their commitments under the agreement. The Americans want Iranians to halt their nuclear programs, and thereafter paved the way for the removal of sanctions. And I think the Iranians, when the last time I was in a conversation with them, they had this pretty logical point that, look, Trump broke the agreement. He imposed the sanctions. So all the Americans need to do is restore status quo ante, and we will be back to doing business. The reason I think that these three developments that I've chosen are important from India's perspective. The Abraham Accords, because UAE and Israel genuinely are India's two closest partners in the Middle East. The kind of sensitive discussions that we have with the Emiratis and the kind of strategic support that we have received from the Israelis. So when two of our closest allies in the region start talking to each other and normalize relations, I think it's a no-brainer that good things will come out of it. But in a more substantive way, I was speaking a couple of weeks back at a webinar that the American Jewish Committee had organized with me and the Dr. Ron Malka, the Israeli ambassador to Delhi, and a couple of other folks. And the topic, interestingly, was opportunities for trilateral cooperation between Israel, India, and the Gulf. Now that relations are normalizing, how does Israeli technology marry with Gulf capital and India's market and the scale that India offers, and try to get some of that going. I'm also pleased about the Al-Ula agreement because, frankly, the discord between the Qataris and their neighbors had become a nuisance for us also. I mean, I recall that when they first froze ties about 2.5 years, 3 years back, I was ambassador in Abu Dhabi at that time, and I got a frantic call from our Minister of Civil Aviation saying that, please meet your Emirati friends and tell them that the flight bans that they have put means that Air India flights from Kerala to Qatar will now have to do an extra 45 minutes detour because of the closure of airspace, and please intervene and see if you can do something about it, because these are small planes, the 737s or the A320s, and if they are to do that extra 45 minutes or an hour, that means that they have to forego their cargo capacity. So anyways, I did intervene, and
exactly whatever documents need to be signed, ideally Friday.
I did intervene, and the Emiratis were very responsive, and they said, no, this is our internal fight, and we have no desire to bring friends into it. And so, the status was restored. But also it means that we can now comfortably reach out not only to the Emiratis and the Saudis, but also to the Qatari sovereign funds and others to invest in India. And the fact that we have such a significant Indian community in Qatar. Finally, the Iran situation. India will be one of the major beneficiaries if the JCPOA gets restored, if the sanctions are lifted. Several of our refineries have been used to Iranian oil, and so to substitute it is costly. But beyond that, it's also the fact that our exports to Iran, which were growing, have suffered. So those are the three kind of salient developments over the last few months, which I picked up. And I said that since I'm speaking to an audience in Mumbai, I think it's important to understand the context in terms of history, because at one level, politics and economics tend to be interconnected. When you talk to old timers in the Gulf, not the guys who necessarily live in the shiny skyscrapers of Dubai, but a previous generation of people, and start hearing stories about how the initial economic activity in the Gulf was really pearl diving at the start of the 20th century. And not that the fact that it was pearl diving, but the merchants who used to come and finance the pearl diving, the money that enabled the captain to buy the supplies that would enable the captain and his boat to be out in the sea for 3 months during the pearl diving season. The merchants were from Mumbai and from Gujarat. When the divers came back, the buyers were again the same merchants. They were the market largely for it. I think we've forgotten that for much of the first half of the 20th century, until India became independent, it was the Bombay presidency that used to determine and pursue British interests in the Gulf. It was Bombay that was really the capital, not London, in terms of the British agents who were based in Dubai or in other places. Aden, in fact, in the port of Aden in Yemen, was a part of the Bombay presidency. So when I say that this is your natural backyard, I've heard stories from my Arab friends in the Gulf that pre the oil boom of the 1970s, before they became really wealthy, if there was one city that they knew for tourism, for healthcare, for education, for trade, it was Bombay. And so partly, I'm keen that, we pick up the threads. and try and restore that primacy that Bombay has. And it's one of the things that I'm trying to do with my current work at the Observer Research Foundation, where we're working very closely with the ORF office in Mumbai to make it happen. But let me fast forward from the historical side. And if you move to the 1980s, where now there's this oil prices fueled construction boom happening, and you've got mass migration of workers from South Asia taking place into the Gulf. The economic relationship was growing between India and the Gulf. But we tended, as diplomats even, we tended to see the relationship largely through the prism of labor, that we've got a large labor constituency there and we've got to cater to their needs. And yes, some trade and investment stuff, but not really a whole lot. But I think the problematic part for me when we look back at that period of our engagement was that we largely saw countries like UAE, places like Dubai, from the prism of our relations with Pakistan. These were countries seen as pro-Pakistan. In our heads, we'd put them in that basket of pro-Pakistan. And this is quite an extraordinary thing, considering that this was our backyard and in the context of the relations that we historically enjoyed with these countries. So, in the 90s, the governments, various governments instituted a look east policy in terms of resuscitating our relations with the ASEAN countries. And guys like us who were invested in the Arab world were saying, when do we see a look west policy, which focuses our spotlight back on our near neighborhood? While Prime Minister Manmohan Singh made an effort, he invited the King of Saudi Arabia as a chief guest on Republic Day in 2006, and later in 2014 he even visited Riyadh. But then they lost power, and not a whole lot really happened in strategic terms. I think the real breakthrough came when Prime Minister Modi visited Abu Dhabi in August of 2015. Remember, for a country that's next door to us and with which we have such a large relationship, his was the first visit by any Indian Prime Minister since Mrs. Gandhi in 1981. So 34 years, no Indian Prime Minister visited Abu Dhabi. And so obviously that neglect rankled with the leadership of those countries, because at the end of the day, you have monarchical societies with long memories of relationships. But since then, Mr. Modi came back twice during my term, and we did this extraordinary gesture of breaking protocol to host the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, as the chief guest on our Republic Day in 2017. And I say broke with protocol because that's usually an honor meant for the head of state or head of government. But Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed was neither. But we took a pragmatic view that, given the fact that the Sheikh Khalifa has been sort of comatose or had suffered a stroke and is incapacitated, the real power is with the Crown Prince, and we should work with him. The response that we have received through this outreach to UAE and later on to Saudi Arabia has been quite extraordinary. We now have strategic partnership agreements with both of them. And for me, when I look back over the last few years, a couple of things really stand out on the political side. Number one, the manner in which the UAE leadership invited Mrs. Sushma Swaraj to be the guest of honor at an Organization of Islamic Countries conference, Foreign Ministers Conference, that they were hosting in Abu Dhabi. They coordinated very closely with us to make sure that nothing leaked out. And, it was quite interesting to see 5 days before the conference, when the announcement was made simultaneously in Delhi and in Abu Dhabi that Mrs. Sushma Swaraj would be the guest of honor, for the Pakistani Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi to say in their National Assembly that I just learned about it through Twitter. This is how deep the coordination with us was. And for the next 5 days, despite Imran Khan's calls, despite Qureshi's tantrums, despite everything that they did, the Emiratis said, there is no way that we would disinvite our honored guest. The Pakistanis, as founding members of the OIC, threatened to walk out and boycott, and the Emiratis held firm. And so on the day, 1st of March 2019, when this happened, I was getting goose flesh that the Indian foreign minister was on the dais with the Emirati foreign minister and the OIC secretary general, and the Pakistani desk slot was vacant. They had chosen to boycott the session. And for those of you who are interested in history, please look up what happened exactly 50 years back in Rabat in Morocco, when the OIC was established. And India had been invited at that time to join. And Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed had led a delegation to Rabat. And thanks to General Yahya Khan's tantrums in Rabat, we were kept on hold. And eventually the meeting happened without Indian participation. So really for me, it was like a wheel coming a full circle in 2019. But also look at a few months later in August, when we revoked Article 370. The one Arab country that stood up in support for us and actually made a statement that this is India's internal business was UAE. And after that, over the last few months, I think you've all seen Imran Khan's desperate efforts to somehow get the OIC to do an emergency meeting on Jammu and Kashmir. And the Saudis have held firm, and the Emiratis have held firm, and the Pakistanis are traumatized at the developments that have taken place, because they treated this always as an extension of their country because of the religious factor. They thought it was all about the Ummah. And so I just want to say that, you know, on the political side, we've been repaid, I think, for the initiatives with quite exceptional responses. Equally important, I think, is the fact that you know, UAE committed to invest up to $75 billion into the Indian economy. I had the privilege of working very closely with the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, which is their sovereign fund, and it's the world's second largest sovereign fund with assets of about $900 billion. You know, they became the first anchor investors into India's National Infrastructure Investment Fund. And after that, they have been making major investments into our highways, into our renewable energy sector. They, of course, you know best, they had a strong interest in Mumbai airport as well, which did not come to pass. But you know, the instruction that has gone to their people is very strongly that India matters and the India relationship matters, and please do more in terms of looking at investment opportunities in India. A friend of mine who works in Abu Dhabi Investment Authority told me that conservatively, they have around $15 billion, that's say 100,000 crores, invested in Indian stock markets. They said that you can't probably pick any major company which doesn't have some investments from ADIA's portfolio managers. The third area, I think, which is equally important, is energy. We, you know, ONGC Videsh used to be prospecting for oil from Vladivostok all the way to Venezuela. And yet we never got a toehold in the Gulf, which is quite extraordinary. Finally, we made a breakthrough in 2018 when we got our first oil concession in a producing field in what is called the Lower Zakum Basin. And then we got a second concession for a very prospective onshore block as well. Along with that, the Emiratis worked with us, Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, ADNOC, worked with us to establish our first strategic petroleum reserve in Mangalore. And in a sense, we worked to create a template for future petroleum reserves, strategic petroleum reserves, so that in the event of a war or a catastrophe, we have enough reserves to keep our economy going on for a while at least. The big one, of course, which was a $50 billion investment plan, was Aramco and the ADNOC to combine for the major Ratnagiri oil refinery. And thanks to Maharashtra politics, that hasn't yet seen the light of the day and was becoming a bit embarrassing because the party which is now in power was the one stridently opposing the land acquisition program of the government from Delhi. But that's how politics operates. But I just wanted to give you a sense of how much things have changed. And I think it would be facile to say that we've done such a great job and things have changed. Yes, Mr. Modi made the outreach. Yes, guys like us on the ground did what we could. But somewhere the Arabs have also changed. And I think it's important for that notion to sink in, that countries like UAE, which were deeply conservative, and don't go by the glitz of Dubai, but places like Abu Dhabi or others, which were deeply conservative, today, they have decided to take a hard line against radical Islam. They see themselves at the front line in fighting extremism and terrorism. And so, not only have they taken this stance, but they see India as an ally in this, as a partner in this. And in a sense, they're going out of their way to promote this notion of tolerance. 3 years back, they created a high-profile position of Minister for Tolerance, and a member of the royal family, Sheikh Nahyan, was appointed as the minister. And his job really is to undertake activities which get communities to work together, to not be complacent about the fact that we are tolerant, but to proactively reach out and give that message. And if you see just a couple of the things that they've done over the last 3 years, in 2019, Abu Dhabi invited both Pope Francis and the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar from Cairo to come for this remarkable convergence meeting in Abu Dhabi. And they signed something called Document of Human Fraternity. And in turn, Abu Dhabi is establishing they've created this compound, which is called House of Abrahamic Faiths. And in the same complex, they will have a mosque, a synagogue, and a church. Think, a mosque, a synagogue, and a church in the same complex in Abu Dhabi. I had the privilege of working very closely with the top leadership for the first Hindu temple in Abu Dhabi. And the Swaminarayan people, the Baptist Swaminarayan who are taking the lead in the temple, they created 2 designs for the temple because we didn't know which one the Abu Dhabi side would approve. The first one was a very conservative, what they call their New Jersey sort of model, which is a rectangular building, and the temple is kind of recessed inside. So when you're passing around, you don't really see the temple. And the other one you could call the Neasden model, which is the temple with all its glory. And so I had the responsibility of taking this to the leadership there. They looked at it, and the decision took a minute. They said, we agreed to a temple. It should look like a temple. And so it was. It was the Neasden model, which was chosen. And I give you these examples to give you a sense of how much of the change has happened there. And one of the things that has happened because of this change is that suddenly Pakistan finds that its traditional religion card is no longer valid. It's been demonetized, so to say. And in the Gulf view, and here I'm talking about the Saudis as well, who are actually undertaking some very major reforms in their own society, and these too will have far-reaching ramifications on how Islam is seen and perceived in the region. From a Pakistani standpoint, these were their supporters. These were their the blank checks for the donations and the free oil and all of that. And suddenly that's gone away. And for the Saudis and the Emiratis, the Pakistanis are actually a problem with all the radicalization, the terrorist groups, the network of radical madrasas. All of that is seen as a problem potentially. So that's again to give you a sense of the change that has happened. So let me just conclude by a couple of remarks. I think the Middle East, certainly the Gulf, is an area in transition in their thinking. How they see the world, how they are trying to move away from oil-dependent economies into knowledge-based economies, into economies that are services-driven. And these are explicit commitments that they have made over the last few years. For us, it has meant a deepening of our defense ties, our economic ties, our energy ties, and certainly at a people-to-people level, the fact that we have 9 million Indians in the Gulf. I think the last year for which data was available was 2019. And in 2019, we got about $80 billion of remittances globally, of which 56 billion came from the Gulf. 19 billion, a quarter, came just from UAE. So, the numbers speak for themselves. Bombay is a business destination. How many people in the audience today would know that UAE is our third largest trading partner after the US and China, larger than Japan, Germany, UK? Raise hands if you know it, really. Our bilateral trade last year was $60 billion. And our exports were $32 billion, which means that after the United States, UAE, little UAE, was our second largest destination of exports. Not my numbers, DGFT. So these are relationships that matter. I strongly believe that the business community in Mumbai has a stake in the relationship and should look at it far more closely than perhaps it currently does. It used to bother me immensely that there were 23 Indian banks at the Dubai International Financial Center. So which means every major Indian bank has a presence in Dubai. And yet they transact no business with the Emiratis. They seem to be content to live in an Indian bubble. It is of the Indian, by the Indian, for the Indian. They are happy to tap the NRI community, and I really think it's exceptionally lazy to look at it in those terms. So I wanted to just leave this note with you that there is a lot of opportunity in the area, and those opportunities are going to grow thanks to the shifting sands that we spoke about. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Ambassador Suri. That was truly insightful and very informative. We have some questions from our members.
Sure.
And we'll start with Mudit Jain.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your very informative talk. My question is that Pakistan has reached out to India. They said, General Bawa said India and Pakistan should talk peace. And I believe that initiative came from UAE. Can you comment on that, sir, please?
Not really. Partly because I'm no longer, this has happened after I left service. So, it would be facile for me to say that I know stuff which is super sensitive post my retirement, but partly because I'd allow these initiatives to flower as they are moving forward. I should say that, there was a very strong expression of desire from UAE and Saudi Arabia post the Pulwama attack and the Balakot strikes. It's public knowledge that both the UAE Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdullah and the then Saudi Foreign Minister Adil Jubair came together to Delhi, and they also went together to Islamabad. Just as UAE and Israel normalizing relations helps us, I think India and Pakistan normalizing relations makes life easier for some of our friends in the Gulf. I can say that they have a strong interest, but I won't go beyond that.
Thank you. SV Prasad, your questions?
Ambassador Navdeep Suri, first of all, fabulous talk. We didn't want it to end. And to use a little bit of Arabic, which, if I'm wrong, kindly gustaki maaf. Shukran jazilan lak. Absolutely, thank you very much. Amazing.
Ahlan sahlan.
So on that note, I just a few questions to you. One is, you touched upon the MBS factor and Saudi Arabia changing, the Mohammed bin Sultan factor, Saudi Arabia changing, because earlier the Wahhabism, Maulvis seemed to have a very strong hold and spreading of Wahhabism. With MBS coming, there's a lot of opening out of the economy, women being allowed to drive, and so on and so forth. He's been talking about creating a separate wonderful city, which will be the most modern city. He's also talking of weaning away from oil in the next 50 odd years, using the deserts in Arabia. So your views on MBS's influence and good influence from a global perspective. That is question number one. Question number two is, of course, congratulations, though belated, to the second highest award, the Padma Vibhushan, if you can call it, of UAE. What really drove UAE giving the Bharat Ratna to our Pradhan Mantri? So your thoughts would be great. And my third and last question is, the ceasefire that was on LOC, how much of it was a factor that China is kind of pulling back from the LAC? Your answers on all three would be very nice. Thank you very much.
So, I think MBS is a major factor. And, I had recently done an op-ed for a newspaper post the release of the Khashoggi report that, even though the brutal murder of Khashoggi was unacceptable, there's a bigger picture which is at play. And, none of these countries are democracies. But, rather than trying to judge them by whatever international democratic standards might be, it's important to see what they're trying. What MBS is trying to do is hugely risky. He is trying to upturn an order that has been established over the last 40 years, certainly since the attacks on Mecca and the revolution in Iran and all of that. That 1979, I think, is the year that the really strong conservatism came back into the Wahhabi influence came back. So the fact that an entire generation has grown up with that and he's trying to roll that back is a risky endeavor. But, one of the things that is unspoken is that MBZ, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed of Abu Dhabi, the kind of strong and positive influence that he has had on MBS. So it's in the region, it's widely regarded that MBZ is a mentor for MBS, kind of a Bada Bhai relationship. And MBZ has been able to make the argument that, look, in UAE, women drive and the sky doesn't fall. You need to give space to your younger generation to be able to express themselves. And that's why you're seeing many of the changes. And the fact that he's only 33 or 34, and 66% of Saudi Arabia's population is younger than him, means that, you know, he is in sync with the aspirations of 2/3 of his country, even though there is a pushback from certain segments. And that's why I said that, because over the last 40 years, many of the most regressive ideas and ideologies have emanated out of Saudi Arabia. The fact that today these are being rolled back has implications not just for Saudi Arabia. The funding to madrasas in India, or the support for extremist groups elsewhere, all of that has dried up because of the change that is taking place. So, I would say that it's a very profound change, and MBS is clearly the one who's driving it. And you need a strong-willed person who is willing to take the risks that accompany a change on that scale. On the UAE award, I think on the Bharat Ratna, I think the Emiratis truly appreciated the initiative that Prime Minister Modi took. And I think it needs to be seen from the perspective that when the BJP government was elected in 2014, many of the Arab countries were going by the rhetoric that BJP coming into power means that Muslim countries would be neglected, Arab countries would be neglected. But the outreach that was done in 2015, then coming back in 2018 and 2019, hosting MBZ as the chief guest, all of the agreements. I mean, I have seen the body language when they are together. It is like Mera Bhai. So I think, from their perspective, it is a well-deserved recognition of the contribution that the Prime Minister made to the bilateral relationship. But equally for us, the timing was important, because this was the time, I mean, if I remember correctly, the date was August 22, 2019. And this was 2 weeks after the Article 370 was rescinded. And here was the Pakistanis on a full-out campaign against India, against the government. And here was an influential Arab country giving its highest award. Right? So the timing mattered as much as the substance from our perspective. And it really, if you follow Pakistani media at that time, it really took the wind out of their sails. The third, on the ceasefire on LOC, in a sense, it's related to the previous question. Back channels operate. They are a reality of diplomacy. And sometimes they are most effective if they remain back channels and are allowed to operate away from the glare of media and publicity. So, I'm not a great fan of the story that has come out in Bloomberg about the UAE royals' involvement or others, because sometimes that premature publicity can be the kiss of death for an otherwise well-intentioned diplomatic initiative. So treat the reports with a degree of reserve.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Vineet Bhatnagar, you have a question?
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Suri. Excellent and very insightful talk that you gave to all of us. My question was to draw your comments on the evolving role of China in the region. And I would like you to, give an insight into whether their growing economic cooperation and initiatives with Pakistan would work as a countervailing force to all the opportunities that you just described to us.
Look, we encounter China everywhere, not just in the Gulf. We meet them in Africa, we meet them in ASEAN, we meet them in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh and Myanmar, everywhere. And it's not just us. The Americans run into them everywhere, and the Europeans do the same. It's a reality of today's geopolitics and geoeconomics that China is the elephant in the room. And look, there is no question that China has made significant strides in terms of its relationship in the Gulf. They have taken advantage of Dubai's open trading society systems by establishing this Dragon Mart, for example, and leveraging it. They take advantage of the port facilities and really have made the most of it. I think there are still two advantages that we have. And I've, from the times that I used to head the Africa division, I've been saying we should play to our strengths rather than being stampeded by the Chinese into trying to emulate them or do something else, which is short-sighted. Our two strengths are the Indian community. We have 3.4 million Indians in UAE. That's 35% of the country's population. That's 3.5 Indians for every Emirati, right? They are a natural bridge between our countries. We have to leverage that bridge. The Chinese don't have that. The second is an emotional, historical, and cultural connect. We have to build on that. And this is why what bothers me is that, barring honorable exceptions, largely when you go to Muscat or to Kuwait or to Dubai or Bahrain, the Indian community, because it's so large, creates a bubble and lives within that bubble. I used to challenge Indian bankers there. Can you name for me 5 Emirati businessmen who are your clients? No, because it's all Indians. So I think there's a challenge for us to take advantage of the assets and resources that we have, rather than lament what the Chinese are doing. The Chinese will do what they have to do. But jo hum kar sakte hain, wo hum to kare. Rather than say, wo le gaya. So, why did no Indian Prime Minister visit all these years? Why is it that even today, when we are there, we only talk to each other? I mean, there are a number of my Indian friends who are sufficiently insensitive to say Dubai is the best Indian city outside India. Right? But for the Emiratis, that's not a joke. That's an insecurity. I think, and on the China-Pakistan cooperation, look, it's there. It's again a reality that we have to deal with. I personally don't think it influences our relationship with the Middle East. I think that's strong and self-sustaining on its own. The fact that we've been able to elbow Pakistan out in the manner that we have in strategic terms over the last few years is very important. And so I would just maintain that, the Chinese, of course, will be there, but at least let us fully realize what we are capable of.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Suri.
Rohini, go ahead.
Yeah. Ambassador Suri, excellent talk. I want to shift gears from economy. In 1980s, as you rightly said, a lot of Arab people came for healthcare in India, and especially Bombay. But we see over a period of time, less and less are coming. Why? What is the cause of this shift?
The one is that we haven't done, I think we were complacent.
Ambassador Suri, you're on mute.
You're on mute, sir.
Sorry, I don't know how that happened. I'm saying that perhaps we got complacent. We took relationships for granted, and those relationships were strong for the previous generation. And even today, I know wealthy Arabs whose mothers still want to come to their favorite doctor in Bombay, yes. Right? But the youngsters will rather go to Germany.
Yes.
The next generation would rather go to Germany. And this is my point, that we haven't done enough to reach out. We thought that we took these for granted. So I'm not aware of any serious marketing effort from our top hospitals that reaches out to the younger generation, who are the next. These are youthful societies. So, what have we done for the 30, 40-year-olds today to tell them that, look, we have the best in the class facilities? Let me go a step beyond. I've conveyed this feedback to Apollo. I've conveyed this feedback to some of the other Indian hospital groups. One of the things was, even in the food that we serve, in the channels that we show in the hospitals, we make no allowance for the Arabs. Absolutely. How much does it cost to put in a bouquet of Arabic channels, or to make food which is friendly to them? Because the younger generation, curiously, especially the men, are not that much into Indian cuisine. They are westernized. So I think we've dropped the ball on that. And unless we make a conscious effort to package our facilities to the younger generation, we would, and the same goes for educational institutions, right? Yes. The previous generation used to come to Bombay to study. And so really the onus partly is on Bombay itself, on the city's elite, to see how it can reconnect with the younger generation. The older is going away.
So do you think telemedicine will help in this case? Having government to government set up for telemedicine and promoting the doctors which are...
Look, Abu Dhabi has the Cleveland Clinic's biggest hospital outside America.
Yes.
It's a $2 billion hospital, headed by an Indian doctor from America. Yeah. So, they can afford to have the finest facilities. The challenge really is, how do we get them? There's something really bizarre. Many of the rich Arabs have started going to Bangalore for something called ozone therapy.
Yes.
Somebody sold them the concept and they go. Kisi marketing ki na? So I think some of the marketing genius of Mumbai needs to be directed towards the Gulf, so that we can recapture the imagination of the next generation.
Thank you, sir. That was lovely.
Farhad, go ahead.
Firstly, a brilliant talk, as everybody has said, absolutely outstanding. No, my question was, I'm sure you've been asked this before. What is the long-term, so to say, immigration policy that Middle East is going to adopt, where people are living there for many years, and their status of life is just a job and they go away the next day, literally. So there is a permanent residency, or I'm not even talking about a passport eventually, but I think some kind of long-term, if you talk of the relationship with the nation, I think there has to be other bonding with the relationship, which is going to be more long-term. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think broadly on migration issues, you would probably see three trends emerging. The first, for elites like you, Farhad, is that about 2 years back, the Emiratis, for example, announced a golden visa, which was going to be a 10-year visa. This year, they have announced PR for select categories. And this is important because, today you have third-generation Indians in these countries. The grandfather went in the 40s or 50s. And now these are the third generation born in that country. And still they have Indian passports and 3-year visas. That's how unfair or inequitable the system currently is. But I think because of the pressures of economic recession, of COVID, of need to encourage people to stay longer, the recognition that post-retirement, Dubai can be a home for many people if they are given the security, you're beginning to see the initial changes come into play. And I think those trends would probably gather momentum in the coming years. So right now it's a 10-year golden visa, but they've defined certain categories for which they will start doing, giving PR based on their needs rather than your needs. The second trend, I think, which I see is, given that these countries have large and growing youthful populations, you will be seeing the Omanization, Emiratization, Saudiization, etc. of the workforce. And you can't quarrel with that. You know, they realize that the days when you could give everybody a sarkari job are gone. So the private sector has to thrive. So the private sector will also find itself pressured to hire more locals. And that remains a challenge. In Saudi Arabia, it's happening. You're already seeing front desk managers, for example, in hotels who are Saudis. So that's a second shift. The fact that women can drive means tens of thousands of Indian drivers who used to drive Saudi women are no longer needed. And these are, you know, transitions that are happening. The third, I think, and that's something that we should really work on, is upskilling. So, you know, during my stint in Abu Dhabi, we did a pilot project matching 16 vocations from electrician and plumber and welder and so on, with, you know, the requirements that the UAE has established in terms of the skills requirements, and the requirements that UAE has established. Farhad is trying his best to distract me. Hi. The requirements and what are the skill development programs that we have? Are the qualifications that we are following aligned with those? Are the certificates that we issue acceptable to them? And so we've done a lot of sort of this grunt work over the last 3 years in matching or harmonizing our skill development programs with the National Skills Development Corporation with what the Emirati job requirements are. But I think we will have to keep upskilling our people if we really want to retain our position as the preferred expatriates.
Thank you. Very, very good. Thank you. Very relevant.
Jagdish, go ahead, please.
Thanks. Ambassador, great talk. I'm sorry to be a bit of a party pooper, but, you know, I would imagine diplomats like you would be batting on a fairly sticky wicket with what's been happening in India in the last 6 years, especially in the Modi era, with all the almost overtly Islamophobic stuff happening, like the CAA rules, like Jamia, like JNU, like Love Jihad laws, like, you know, one can rattle on and on. Are you saying in this era of open social media, both at the leadership level and the population level, there should be a fair bit of animosity and alarm and what have you building up, and surely that affects ties both at the macro and the micro level?
So it's, you know, you raise a very legitimate point, and it is a matter of concern. Let me say that the developments, each one of them that you've spoken about, do not help the work of diplomats like us. They add an additional layer of complexity, an additional layer of challenges that we have to deal with. And some of these are not easy. I post-retirement, because, you know, now we can speak far more freely than when we are in position, have voiced my own concern, particularly on some of the extremely rabid stuff that is said on social media. And we have had cases where they have caused a degree of concern. So I'm not going to wish away what you've said. The issues are real. And our interlocutors there are extremely well informed. They are aware of what goes on. But, you know, look, in the world in which we live, nobody's smelling of roses. And, at the end of the day, strategic interests will usually trump these elements. And the strategic equation remains valid. There's a pragmatism over there that India, as a large, democratic, stable, broadly secular country, remains a force of stability in the region. And it's a good thing for them and for the markets that we offer, etc. So no relationship is perfect. These are nuisances to the otherwise, blooming relationship. Let me just finish on one thought, and I understand that we're running against the clock. But their former Minister of State in Abu Dhabi used to often raise this question. He would say, Ambassador, what is happening in India is fascinating when I look globally. That look at ISIS. A small country like Tunisia, or even a country like Belgium, has contributed more fighters to ISIS than India, with the second largest Muslim population in the world. Surely you must be doing something right. What is it, right, that keeps people from being radicalized in the large numbers? Now, what you are saying and some of the developments certainly suggest that there is no reason for us to be complacent, but I'm just giving you a snapshot into what the other side thinks when they look at the larger picture of what's happening in the world.
Thank you.
Suri, we have two more questions if you have the time for them.
Perhaps for maybe a couple of questions, because...
yeah, just two. We have just two more. That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mayank Kumar, go ahead, please.
Ambassador, Fali, sorry, I have two questions in my question. Ambassador, two questions, quick ones. It is our impression or my impression that Dubai has normally kept its own economic policies, etc., within the Emirates. Is this going to continue? Are you going, or do you see Emirates converging into one entity overall? And the second question is, do you see Saudi-Israel relationships normalizing also in the near future?
Thank you. Dubai continues to follow its own economic policies, but the growing financial burdens on Dubai and the fact that last time around, I think post the Lehman crisis, Dubai had to be bailed out with a $20 billion soft loan from Abu Dhabi, means that some of the power has shifted towards Abu Dhabi. Even today, the Minister of Economy, the Minister of Trade are typically Dubai-walas, whereas the Minister for Defense or the Minister, effectively the Defense and the Foreign Affairs is run out of Dubai, Abu Dhabi. So you see this arrangement over there domestically, that the security and foreign policy kind of initiatives are taken out of Abu Dhabi, and to an extent, the trade and economy initiatives come out of Dubai. But I think two things are happening. One is Dubai's model of we'll accept your money, no questions asked, wherever it comes from, is under challenge with the Financial Action Task Force and other norms globally on money laundering, etc. I think that model will have to be reviewed, and UAE certainly sees reputational damage if it is business as usual. The second is foreign policy might be Abu Dhabi's prerogative, but foreign policy also has economic implications. So when Abu Dhabi decides to break relations with Qatar, the impact is first and foremost felt in Dubai. So you can see how they are. I believe that the Dubai will try to keep its separateness around, but it needs to be financially solvent to be able to do that. And each time there is a need to bail out Dubai by Abu Dhabi, it loses a bit of its independence. I mean, on the face of it, you will always have this thing that MBZ and MBA are my brother, but there are underlying strains, as you would expect in a relationship. On Saudi-Israel relations, I think, frankly, it's a question of time. Remember that the countervailing forces in Saudi Arabia are far stronger than in UAE or in Bahrain. And MBS probably doesn't want to have that much on his plate at the same time. I believe that Netanyahu was very keen to have some kind of an announcement that he could use in his elections today, I think, that are taking place in Israel again for the 4th time in 2 years. But my belief is that the trend towards normalization of ties with Israel has begun. So it should come as no surprise if other countries join that as well. The unspoken question is what happens to the Palestinians and what happens to the two-state solution.
Thank you.
Well, we have a last and final question from Mehul Sampath.
Yeah. Excellent talk, Mr. Navdeep. Thank you. It's interesting you mentioned Oman. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, our family is from Oman, and I'm completely aware of the bubble that you talk of. I had a question on the financial industry. You know, like you mentioned, there are a lot of Indian banks in Dubai, especially, who are present and who don't have much business. Is there a trade promotion body or a policy-making body that exists between UAE and India, specifically Dubai and India, which, people from investment business can approach and, start a dialogue for a more unified approach towards this whole business, because there's a lot of potential there?
So we have a high-level task force on investment, which is headed by the Commerce and Industry Minister from the Indian side and by the Managing Director of the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority from UAE, Sheikh Hamid. And that task force meets every year. One of the things that they have tried to do is make investing easier, because despite our claimed improvements in the ease of doing business, India isn't the easiest of places. I see that one Mr. Jain has put a comment about the sovereign wealth funds, and I know that while Abu Dhabi Investment Authority has invested in India, Mubadala has invested in India, it's a very small fraction of what they've put out in the West. So keep in mind that each of the big ticket investments that the Emiratis made into India, Ittisalat, Emaar, Ittihad, all ran into trouble.
Right.
And each one for Ittisalat with the infamous 2G scam, Emaar with MGF, Ittihad with Jet Airways. And so, these are royal family owned companies, and they, when they sink in India, it has a certain impact. So one of the things that challenges for me was to resolve a whole list of what we used to call legacy issues. That how do you first unblock the old before you pipeline, before you can really get new funds flowing in. And we've managed to do most of that. At least I think we were able to convince our interlocutors that we as the embassy, we as government are a part of the solution, at least in this government, and not a part of the problem. And we will work with you to resolve issues wherever we can. So the high-level task force is an important body, and it's important for people like you to feed your suggestions into that entity.
Okay. I was also referring to the outbound investments, that India can send out into UAE, because it's an excellent platform. And, all these free trade zones, they come and market themselves independently. There's a lot of fragmentation.
But Mehul, 38% of Jebel Ali free zone is with Indians.
But very small in number.
There are 500. There are 500 plus Indian corporates who have their Middle East and North Africa headquarters in Dubai. 23 Indian banks. My job is to get some from there also.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ambassador Suri, thank you very much for spending this afternoon with us. It was absolutely brilliant.
Pleasure.
May I please request Satyan Israni to propose the official vote of thanks?
With pleasure, Pali. Ambassador Suri, thank you so much for talking to us. Your talk was really insightful and informative and gives us a heightened awareness and a positive perspective about the Middle East vis-a-vis India. And as a token of our appreciation for spending this afternoon with us, we will be lighting up a rural household using solar power. And we will send you the certificate as well in due course.